So hello, everyone. Welcome to this session on sustainable economic growth and about ESG and sustainable finance and the circular economy. I am joined. My name is Nie-Woo, and I'm a partner at KPMG, heading up ESG in Hong Kong. And I'm joined here by our three distinguished panelists, Eli Konvitz, who is a Director of Urban Development and Design Asia Pacific at Atkins. Also with us is Natalie Chung, who is the Sustainability Lead at DFI Retail Group. So DFI is Dairy Farm. And also with us is Max Song, who is the founder of Carbonbase, and also co-founder of the Sustainable Bitcoin Standard. So it's wonderful to have all of you here. And to start with, I'll just set the scene with a little short presentation. So with COP27 happening in Egypt very recently, and all of the aspects going on, I think that a lot of people are questioning, well, are there any specific actions that are being taken to decarbonize our world? And I have to say that there has been increasing efforts, in particular in the private sector, in the decarbonization journey. Of course, we've still got a long way to go, but I just wanted to share with you what some of the corporates are doing and how they're doing it. So with that, I will just do a short presentation. So I think that the main way that a lot of corporates are doing decarbonization is through this initiative called the Science-Based Target Initiative. So this is like almost like the gold standard of helping corporates really meet their net zero goals. And in order to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees. But if you look at the graph on the right, you would see that if we really did do things business as usual, we're pretty much going into a 4-degree world. And if, you know, current policy projections, we're still going to hit 3 degrees. Of course, this cannot just be done by the public sector. The private sector really has to also be doing this. And we've seen a lot of companies now pledging and committing to science-based targets. And so if you look at that dotted line in the middle, in order to reach below 1.5 degrees, which is the light green bit on the bottom there, we will have to reduce from 70 to 95% of our carbon footprint by 2050. Compared to 2010 levels. And if we hit 2 degrees, of which there is still going to be significant impact on biodiversity, just climate catastrophes and all of that, even at below 2 degrees, we still have to hit 40 to 70% below 2010 levels. So it is a gargantuan task. And so how companies do that is they set these science-based targets and then they submit it to SBTI, which is an organization. And you can see on the right there that we are getting a lot of applications in particular in the recent years. So you can see that in 2021, you are getting a lot of commitments and then approved targets. So basically what happens is you send a letter in with your targets, and that's your commitment. And then they will, SBTI, the organization, will validate the targets, and then they will be approved targets. So cumulatively, you're looking at around 1,500 around 1,500 approved targets and about 1,000 committed commitments. And this is, I don't have the data for 2022, but we're seeing that a lot of organizations are doing that as well in 2022. Now, this is kind of like what kind of like a reduction net zero target looks like, where you will have, there are two kind of like dotted lines on the right there. And one is green and one is kind of dark, black, well, it's black. So you see that there is this, so as they kind of like do these abatement within their value chain, you can see that the line continues to reduce until it gets to that point where there is that crosshair, where it turns, the black line comes about. So what that means is that at some point in time, the abatement of carbon cannot be done sufficiently, and the organization will have to buy carbon offsets and do some neutralization. So of course, the organization will be trying to reduce as much as it can, but as closer to you get to the target year 2050, more than likely you are going to be left with residual carbon. And as such, that neutralization part is what is needed. And so, some of the things that Max is doing around carbon offsets, that's where these kind of like carbon offsets come into play. But they can come into play a lot earlier than this, of course. And as you can imagine, the closer we get to the end goal, the more and more expensive these things will be. Now, in order to be able to calculate the a corporate's carbon emissions, under the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, there are 3 types of emissions. So Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3 is really the 3 types. Scope 1 is the direct emission. So you can imagine if you are a factory and you have a boiler, then that boiler that is burning coal, perhaps, that is direct emissions within your organization. That's considered Scope 1. So Scope 2 is indirect emissions and usually is purchased electricity. So the emissions for purchased electricity, of course, happens at the electricity plant, not on site in your factory per se. But because you're using the electricity, you're causing the emissions at the electricity plant. So that is also attributed to you. And so that is Scope 2. And then Scope 3 is where there is a lot of different types of emissions. And it includes things like purchased goods and services, capital goods, employee commuting, investments, and the like. There are like 15 types of different items there. And that's where a lot of work needs to be done still. And as you can imagine, purchased goods and services for any kind of like fast-moving consumer goods company, a retailer, you can imagine that the majority of their footprint is going to be in their supply chain. So with that is a lot of work still needs to be done on the supply chain and the Scope 3 reductions, and hopefully we'll be able to talk about some of this today as well. So I think with that, that is the end of my presentation, and I just want to, I'll stop sharing, and then I'll go into the panel discussion now, and maybe we'll get our panelists to just give a brief introduction of themselves and what they do within their respective organizations. So with that, maybe we'll start with Eli.
Just had to unmute myself. Excuse me. Thank you, Pat. Actually, Atkins was one of those SBTI corporate statistics in 2021. I was very proud that the company signed up to SBTI. For the last decade, while at Atkins, based in Hong Kong, and I should say I've actually just moved on from Atkins, so we'll look out for a new title soon. I've been advising clients across Asia, and particularly in Southeast Asia, on urban development projects, particularly at the large scale, so right up to entire cities. And a lot of what I've been doing is helping governments and developers, asset owners, and other actors in the built environment to create more livable and more sustainable places. I first started working on climate change policy and strategy in London way back in 2006. And I have to say, it's a little bit unfortunate how many of the key takeaways that we developed then are still really, really relevant. And that's particularly around how the private sector in particular needs to step up to the bat. But maybe I should stop there and hand over to the next speaker. We can get into that. In the discussion.
Great. Yeah, well, maybe we'll move on to Natalie.
Sure. Thank you so much, Pat. And it's great to meet Eli and Max here as well. I'm Natalie. I'm currently the sustainability lead at DFI Retail Group. As Pat mentioned, we are formerly called Dairy Farm. So we operate different businesses, including health and beauty, grocery like Welcome, 7-Eleven convenience stores, and in 12 Asian markets. And at the moment, we're also working on our SBTI roadmap and planning to commit to it next year. So like a lot of work has been done on drafting our net zero plans for Scope 1, Scope 2. And would say Scope 3 is definitely the difficult part because as a retailer, our supply chain is very complex, and especially focusing in Asia, a lot of the farmers and agricultural practitioners are not educated about sustainability. So it is really a journey about collaboration and partnership with all our stakeholders, supply chain stakeholders. So yeah, I look forward to the discussion.
Yeah, and finally, Max.
Thank you so much, Pat. So pleasure, everyone. This is Max from Carbonbase. We've been very active in the Asia Pacific sector in helping large corporates measure their carbon footprints. Some of these large maritime shipping and real estate companies have bought carbon credits for the first time, thanks to the work we're doing. We're also interested in building carbon market infrastructure using digital tools. So my own background is I used to be a data scientist, machine learning specialist from Silicon Valley. I studied actually a master's in Beijing at Tsinghua under Schwarzman Scholars on US, China, and green finance and public policy. I wrote my master's thesis on the topic. Currently doing a part-time PhD here in Hong Kong as well. And one of the things we're very proud of is actually we're the first people in the world to issue NFTs for WWF. And now we're in the sort of middle stages of designing what would become a new carbon registry, the first of its kind in Asia Pacific, servicing China, India, Southeast Asia, and originating credits to recognize the great work that people are doing out here and actually allowing them to sort of receive economic rewards for that as well. Last thing I would say is we're very excited to launch a cool project with WWF Hong Kong called Carbon Neutral Club. So it's kind of like a membership club, but the membership tickets require you to be carbon neutral, either as a corporate or as an individual. So companies that manage to set strong SBTI targets are eligible. And we hope that people will use this as a way to become more engaged with this problem.
Fantastic. So we have somebody, we have Eli on the built environment and predominantly in that infrastructure and urbanization space. We have Natalie, who is in the more of the retail side. And we have Max, who is dealing with the cutting edge of carbon offsets, NFTs, and all of that. So I think we are in for a very interesting discussion. So I think that maybe I'll start with Eli. I think that how do you, with all your time at Atkins, I know that you've moved on from there, but you've been doing this for a number of years. How do you see the progress of all of this carbon reduction initiatives? And what are some of the kind of good things and the deficiencies, you would say, in some of the efforts so far?
Wow. I could talk for about 2 hours on that, but really interesting topic. So I'll try to keep it brief. lots of deficiencies. Maybe I'm seeing the glass half empty these days, particularly after a slightly disappointing COP27. I tend to see a lot of greenwashing, unfortunately, from clients, people who think, well, maybe I can just, so I used to see people would say, I want this to be a smart city. And they didn't really know what the smart city was, but they knew that the chairman had said, I want it to be a smart city. So they decided that they were going to do a smart city. They didn't know if it was going to cost anything or what it would do. So more recently, I started to see, sorry about that, I've got a companion here. So more recently, I've started to see people treating sustainability and net zero developments in a similar way. So I had one client who came to us and said, we've developed this township. It was in a Southeast Asian country, very large township idea, and it's going to be the first carbon neutral township. We explained to them what it would take to actually make that happen. That, oh, we just thought it was kind of an overlay, a feature that we could just sort of simply brand on. We had to explain to them that developing in a way that's actually going to be carbon neutral or really net zero is a much larger undertaking than simply adding a sort of a branding marketing veneer to an existing very conventional plan. But I think if we sort of step back, look, Asia is having its urban century. Urbanization continues apace. Obviously, we've had a little bit of a dip during COVID, but I think we can expect that to get back to normal following earlier trends. And there's a real need for government and business to work together. Now, across much of Asia, and I'm not going to include China here because mainland China does have quite strong signals now from government. Some of them are mixed, to be fair, but there are some very strong signals now from Beijing. But across much of particularly Southeast Asia, which has been my stomping grounds for the last 10 years, the signals from governments are not yet strong enough. So the private sector has to make all the difference. And that's as so often in particularly developing countries. But this is a problem because government regulation is really important, particularly in creating a leveled playing field. And one of the things that I've heard from the private sector time and time again, when I've been working on climate change policy is, look, give us a target, give us a requirement, just make sure that we all have to do it. Because there's only so much room for somebody to play the lead. When they're saying, well, this is going to cost me a lot of money. I'm not sure if I'm going to get value out of it because somebody's looking at the financial bottom line, commercial bottom line. So they're saying, make sure that it's a level playing field so everybody has to do the same thing. Then let's spread the pain. That's fine. I hear that quite a lot. So what do we need? We need government officials who have vision and are willing to take hard decisions. This is something that's generally in, I think, short supply around the world. What we're seeing is that regulation is actually coming in through the back door, often through the finance sector, particularly for listed companies. And that's interesting. It's a great start. It's just a little bit slow. I think we're on a fantastic path to net zero by 2100, maybe 2130. The problem is that we don't have until then. This is the real issue. It's not that people don't want to do better. It's not that people don't want to move to net zero. It's that it's taking a long time and we just don't have that time. What we have is a time problem. It's not a technical problem. It's not a money problem. It's a time problem. That's how I see it. If I drill down into the built environment, which is my specialism, we need to be looking at whole life carbon management. It's not enough to simply talk about operational carbon. We need to be looking at the whole life of assets and buildings. We need to bring carbon and circularity into boardrooms. And we need a lot more skills. We need skills in boardrooms. We need people to understand what it is that specialists are talking about. And we need skills, particularly in sort of the mid-senior levels. There are lots of young people, 23, 25, 28-year-olds who get it and who might have done master's degrees in requisite fields and can do a lot of the work, a lot of the technical work, the number crunching, for example. There are lots more young people who really get this and have that. But in the 35 to sort of 50 and up range, that's where you get people who are like, this is all kind of new and I don't really get it and I've got a day job to do. So that you need a lot more skill development just generally across the sort of the professional sectors in the economy. Design and strategy does have a major role to play. And look, cities are the most complex artifacts that we as humankind have. You know, we've been doing cities for what, 7,000 years? They're kind of big. So, you know, look at what we know. We know that, for example, land use and transport have a real sort of interconnected nexus that can be good and can be bad. If you live in an exurb or a suburb, chances are you're going to need to own a car and look at the emissions that come along with that. If you live in a dense city, then you can probably use public transport if the public transport is available. That helps you to bring down your transport emissions. And I live in Hong Kong. Hong Kong has the world's highest public transport mode share. That means that more journeys are made by public transport in Hong Kong than in any other city in the world. That means very low carbon emissions from transport. And it means that Hong Kong actually has an advantage there when it turns to getting the city to be carbon neutral compared to other much more spread out, much more car-based cities. And there are other advantages to density as well in terms of walkability and in terms of buildings that are probably a little bit more efficient, et cetera. We could get into that. Also, there are other issues like building in the right places. We've got lots of floodplains around the region. And if we're going to reduce risk from climate change in terms of mitigation, as well as adaptation, I should say, as well as mitigation in terms of not contributing to climate change through otherwise unnecessary earthworks or reclamation, we need to be thinking about where we're building as well as how we're building. Lots and lots of projects on vulnerable coastlines. And you build on that coastline, you have to not only make sure that you have to make sure that your project isn't going to be underwater in a few years. So to do that, you have to move a lot of earth, which has a carbon implication. So it's a kind of a double whammy. So we kind of need to all be putting on climate change spectacles and thinking, does this make sense from this viewpoint? One or two other quick points. In the real estate sector, as I said earlier, we're generally mostly only looking at operational carbon, not at embodied carbon in our assets and in our buildings. And I think in Asia in particular, where we have higher density cities, more high-rise buildings, you got a lot more concrete, a lot more steel, that's a lot more embodied carbon. And that changes the balance between operational and embodied. It means you have to design and do other things differently. We're not talking about retrofit, which is a big problem. We need to look at green value and the brown discount. So lots of things that need to be done. I think we've got a lot that we can do. We just need to do it faster. I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thanks, Eli. You brought up a lot of points there. And of course, you know, I think in the built environment, and I'll come back to you on some of that aspects of what is operational and embodied carbon and all of that kind of stuff, just for the better understanding of our audience. Natalie, I mean, so at DFI, you guys run, you know, a number of major retail chains, from Welcome to IKEA to 7-Eleven and all of that. And so, you know, tell us a little bit about your work on SBTI and, you know, some of the initiatives that you guys are doing.
Sure. Thank you so much. And I absolutely agree with what Eli said earlier about having circularity and carbon discussions in the boardroom. So our sustainability journey actually started pretty recently because the Jardines Group has been encouraging more of our business units to work on sustainability and look at SBTI targets. So I guess before that, we didn't even think it's possible for an Asian retailer to set an SBTI target because a lot of our peers are not there yet. So I think the most difficult part would be is around Scope 3 emissions, because for Scope 1 and Scope 2, we have invested a lot of our capex into upgrading our energy efficiency in stores, designing more sustainable stores by looking at embodied carbon as well, and also looking at some of the new installations that can help reduce refrigerant leakages and enhance energy efficiency. So take for an example, in our latest installation at the Fortress Metro Tower store in Fortress Hill, we are starting to install doors on refrigerators, which has been done in Europe over the past decade. But in Asia, because our stores are relatively smaller and the aisles are very narrow, and we like to maximize the business and trade area. So doors hasn't been looked into, but we've realized the benefits of doors are massive that can bring to savings. The doors can, on average, reduce around 10% of energy consumption of the entire store, which would be equivalent to around 10,000 Hong Kong dollars of saving per month, just looking at one store. So imagine like across all of our 300 stores, if we're able to install doors or other kind of installations in our fridges, it can significantly improve the efficiency and keep cold air within the fridges. And of course, this would depend a lot on customers' feedback, because whether customers would think it is more inconvenient for them if they need to open a door to get the goods, and whether this would look good. So now we're preparing on customer communication exercise by telling them how these doors can help save energy and in turn keep the products fresher and in a better quality. So it is a pursuit of both product quality, product safety, as well as sustainability. I think in the retail space, ESG is not just a number, but it's more about engaging the people and about empathy. We're looking at a lot of new initiatives in the store, such as promoting recycling, food waste, source separation, and transferring some of the food that's still edible quality to NGOs such as FoodLink. At the moment, we have around 30 to 40 welcome stores that are donating our extra food that cannot be sold or near expiry items to these NGOs so that they can get sent to people in need. And in the food separation side, previously we were looking at in the monetary term, the shrinkage number, like how much money we're losing from food loss. But now we're educating our frontline store members because we need more help from them to separate the waste. And we're telling them the whole story behind how much people they can help by doing this kind of extra work, and how they can also benefit from the whole better image of the company and serving the society. And we feel that our store members are actually engaging much better when we're able to communicate to them the reason behind doing all these extra sustainability work. And then in the end, of course, it will look better in our figures and how we can reduce Scope 3 emissions through these exercises by reducing our waste. And on the big piece of the puzzle, like Scope 3 emissions, for us, obviously, our biggest portion of emissions would come from Category 1, purchased goods and services, because we're sourcing ingredients, raw materials from farms, mainly concentrated in Southeast Asian countries and mainland China. And among them, we have worked with our consultant to identify several hotspots of the product production, which are meat production, dairy production, and also rice farming. And for each of the product category, we're working with some intergovernmental organizations. For example, for rice, we're working with the Sustainable Rice Platform formed by the UN to check if they have some of the initiatives that can educate farmers on more sustainable farming practices and how we can leverage our own brand rice to change our sourcing practices. For example, if we're able to source more rice from some of the countries that have stricter regulations on rice farmings, or in some of the other countries. For instance, we're sourcing most of our rice from Thailand. And how are we able to work with the Thai government on some of the blanket programs that can help educate farmers to farm in a way, for example, intermittent wetting instead of draining and wetting alternatively, instead of keeping all the paddy flooded the whole year. This can significantly reduce methane emissions. So just looking at these farming practices would be able to draw down our Scope 3 emissions significantly. And I think the last and most important piece that we're starting to look at is how to change and how to educate our customers to purchase more sustainably and to adopt diets that are planet-friendly. We currently have a variety of plant-based products in our supermarkets, as well as low-mileage vegetables that are grown in hydroponic farms close to our distribution centers. However, some of them still have the price premium. And in most of the markets we operate in, we're serving communities that are very underprivileged especially in like Cambodia and Vietnam, people are struggling to have meals to their table. So they wouldn't really care about like the more sustainable products unless we draw them to a price parity with the other products. And this is how we're focusing on our own brand products, because by controlling bulk purchase by a slightly higher profit margin than national brand products, we are able to draw some of the more ethical products at the same price as the normal, like as the alternative. One example would be our own brand cage-free eggs. It is currently the same price as some of the national brands' caged eggs. And by doing this, we're really able to incentivize our customer behavior. Of course, educating them why are cage-free eggs better for the chicken's health and for the chicken's welfare. And at the same time, it provides the same amount of protein or even better quality for the customers at the same price. So this is what we're striving to do to keep the balance between economic and social and environmental sustainability.
Well, thank you, Natalie. You've got a lot of initiatives there, and as you can see, there is so much that needs to be done, as Eli also mentioned. I think that, you know, for retailers like DFI, engaging the supply chain and all of that is not easy work. It takes a lot of work for it to happen, and I think we, you know, we need to appreciate the efforts, because I mean, in the end, you know, there isn't any regulation that says dairy farm needs to do this right now, but they're doing it on their own will. And the more that we have like organizations like DFI, the better, because then they will be taking initiative themselves, and obviously they've already put on the ESG glasses to see that this is needed in the future of commerce. So Max, to you, you're in this really interesting space of the carbon market, and of course all of these digital assets and all of that. And I understand that Hong Kong has just announced the setup of Core Climate, which is an exchange, carbon exchange here in Hong Kong. I just want to ask you, you know, like that chart that I just showed, whereby people are reducing and then the neutralization tends to be nearer the end of that chart. How do you see the carbon market developing, and how do you encourage organizations to buy these offsets a bit earlier, but at the same time do all the groundwork of reduction at the same time? So maybe you can share a little bit about that.
Thanks so much, Pat. And it's beautiful to hear, you know, the great work that Natalie and Eli shared earlier. To me, it's inspiration, and really gives me a lot of energy in the morning, actually, to see, you know, this incredible thing. I really love the concept of low travel, low mileage vegetables. That's fantastic. You know, that's something that really, you know, speaks to the consumer demand of trying to measure, you know, have quantification of where we, you know, what kind of supply chains exist behind the food that we eat. So this is a picture actually of two kind of parallel carbon markets. One of the most important things to share when, you know, I sort of talk to people, to actually disambiguate the confusion around carbon. So, you know, China just launched a compliance carbon market in June last year. Europe has had a compliance carbon market for about 17 years. In the US, there's California and Northern New England, two regional carbon markets. So these compliance carbon markets, where the government actually enlists the companies who are heavy emitters to participate with the risk of penalty. If you don't participate, you either get shut down, you get fined, or you might even go to jail. So this has teeth behind it. And you can see this market size, about $260 billion today. And it's going to grow much bigger in the next few years. On the other side, we have something called a voluntary carbon market, where actually the companies that are not directly on the list of requirements also have a chance to participate. These are people like, you know, Tesla, Pepsi-Cola, maybe Disney. They're not forced to participate, but they want to because it's good for their company, it's good for their ESG metrics, it's good for their social responsibility. And the voluntary carbon market today is tiny. It's like $1 billion. And, you know, hopefully it can grow much bigger, but right now it's still very, very small. So that's kind of a little market context for where this participation looks like. And to the point of SBTI and a few other major standards, like there is a need for companies to really invest in the heavy duty work of reconsidering their supply chain, their kind of work processes, even their products, to sort of understand the carbon impact and then try to make cuts without having to rely on purchasing voluntary credits. But for me, what I want to emphasize today is that the voluntary credits have been, I think, misunderstood. They are not only kind of a indulgence or a get out of free jail card. Actually, what they are is that their ability to assign value to the very meaningful work being done at the grassroots level, especially in developing countries. So these are the 4 carbon registries that we know and love: Verra, Gold Standard, American Carbon Registry, and the Climate Action Reserve. And I call them carbon central banks because they have the ability to create an instrument that has economic value and actually has the ability to transfer economic value to people at the bottom of the pyramid. So one of the biggest topics at COP this year was actually around loss and damages, right? These developing regions are suffering frontline damage to their GDP, to their export economy, and to their internal economy from climate change. Pakistan was 30% underwater earlier this year. Who's going to pay for this, right? The Pakistani government doesn't have, flood insurance for the whole country. So what we see is that the carbon registries have the opportunity to actually transfer value to the people on the ground, the farmers in Pakistan, as they sort of adopt sustainable farming. They actually have the ability to earn income from their reduction of climate change, which then leads to their direct outcome. So instead of having having to hand people a free check, kind of a UBI concept, which is the loss and damages kind of earlier conversation, I think the voluntary carbon markets serve as a very viable market instrument to change the behavior in these people in these countries, and then for them to earn economic rewards. And from a geographic coverage perspective, this is a picture of where these registries are located today. So you can see there's 2 in California, 1 in Washington, DC, and 1 in Switzerland. And so the darker colors on this map are where some of the biggest carbon credit projects are being developed: China, India, Brazil, and various parts of Africa. There doesn't exist a local registry. And what we see is that there's a huge hole to be met actually in creating the first Asia-based carbon registry. I think this actually has a sort of long-term implication for incentivizing human activity in all of these regions. So Carbonbase's mission is that we hope to create an economic structure where 1 million people earn economic living by participating in the carbon markets, from creating supply, from actually going through and doing the hard work necessary. I'm going to share the picture that you showed earlier, Pat. This is the severe drop-off that we need to create. We need to draw down about roughly 30 gigatons of CO2 on a per annum basis. And today, the voluntary carbon market accounts for less than 1 billion tons. It's roughly about like 0.6 billion. So I think that voluntary markets have the opportunity to scale to maybe a $10 billion ton. And then the other 20 billion comes from all of the SBTI metrics that people talked about earlier. I just want to highlight 2 small things. I think that there's actually a really interesting intersection between the Greater Bay Area policy formation and this market design. Because unlike the other regional markets, we here have in this just 50-mile radius, a lot of heavy manufacturing, a lot of power production, a lot of financial services. We can actually create an intersection of carbon markets plus a built environment plus supply chain. And if we do this successfully, this carbon registry can be embedded in this entire market infrastructure. Instead of being separate, instead of being an afterthought, we actually put it inside the existing trade infrastructure. And this is going to create a huge source of jobs, economic development, new kind of employment opportunities here in Hong Kong. So along the way, Hong Kong being a financial center, we see that there is kind of an emerging recognition of carbon credits being an investable asset class. And it's a fundamentally digital investment asset class, because you can't taste, touch, or see a ton of carbon. It only exists as entries in a database. So if we use the blockchain technology that we've been hearing so much about to track, record, and measure the carbon emissions, we can actually enhance the accounting, the MRV, and also the automation of cancellation. We can create public audit trails of destruction. One of the most frustrating things I see right now is when I hear Microsoft buying some carbon, I say, which projects do they support? We have no idea. Like, do they support like the vintage 2010 ones or the vintage 2020 ones, right? Are they doing forestry cover or are they doing some other stuff? We have no idea. So I think that's, to me, kind of an example of where this public data transparency can go a really long way. Last thing I would say is actually on the retail side. This is actually where Natalie mentioned something really exciting to me earlier, is how do we actually embed the conscious consumer participation in the voluntary carbon markets at the point of purchase? Instead of waiting for an afterthought, instead of like doing an end of year accounting, we should be checking it out at the POS system. And so today, the existing 4 registries don't support this concept called an API. An API is basically an application programming interface. It's the ability for you to actually call another program remotely. We think that building a blockchain native registry allows us to actually have an API marketplace, which then leads to a carbon app store, like a Google app store, a carbon app store, where companies like booking.com, Travelocity, Cathay can actually embed the carbon applet directly into their website, into their mobile apps, and that starts leading to a lot more consumer demand. So these are kind of some of the technological innovations capable and possible with our new technology stack that then enables the carbon market to become much more interactive, exciting, and robust, right, for the average person. So I'll briefly pause here.
Wow. Thank you, Max. That was a lot of information, and I've been looking at the carbon market for quite a while, and it still confuses me in many ways. I mean, in terms of, I just wanted to ask you, in terms of, how would people participate in all of this development? Because I think that it's still kind of very not very structured at the moment, and people are doing this and that. There are so many different standards and all of that. I mean, how do people start and participate in all of this?
Yeah, so there's different levels. So there's individual level. So we have built one of the first personal carbon offset calculators here in Hong Kong, and we have thousands of people using us to calculate their personal footprint. We actually have a project with Link REIT right now, where we actually have a dedicated space for the average Hong Kong person to walk in and have someone help them through their first ever carbon calculation for their own personal lifestyle. And then through that, you can actually choose to support on a monthly basis the credit that you owe, right? So I'm big carbon neutral for 3 years. I'm very proud of that, and it counts for my flights, it counts for my food, it counts for my shopping habits. And the more people that participate that way, the sort of more retail understanding we have. We're also going to universities and schools and trying to get students on board, because then they can go back and tell their parents, what are you doing about it? Like, I'm already carbon neutral, like, why aren't you showing up? And so I think that's kind of a way to enact social change. At a corporate level, we work with the managers of companies to say, do you know what your carbon footprint is as a company? And can you take something to do? And some people are not willing to do 100% offset yet, so they do 20%, 30%. Even buying the first ton as a company changes people's mentality. They're like, oh wow, it's not as hard as I thought it is. It's not as expensive as I thought it is. And I feel good about it. I feel like I'm sort of showing up to do my share of the environment. And then at the final part, at the investment and finance level, I'm trying to convince a lot of companies that, or invest managers, that there's an opportunity to invest in carbon credit creation. Europe, which has been doing this for 17 years, Europe's really smart. There's a fund called the Livelihood Fund, which is La Poste, Schneider, Veolia, and a few other companies. They basically pull together a fund to actively invest in carbon mitigation projects in developing regions. They create the supply, they consume the supply themselves, cutting out the middleman, so they're able to have the most efficient, cost-efficient carbon source. And whatever they don't consume, they left over, they sell it on the market. This becomes an active P&L for these companies. So I hope that we can start one of these livelihood funds here in Hong Kong in the near future. And I think that also taps into the other part of people's brains. Instead of the guilt and responsibility, it's actually a new business growth opportunity. And that sort of changes people's mentality about their participation.
Well, thanks, Max. Yeah, I mean, there is so much going on, and I think that I mean, from my work, seeing kind of like how SBTIs are done, there is so much that can be done, but then in the end you will get it purchase. And maybe I'll just go back to Eli. I mean, you talked quite a bit about, well, the embodied carbon and the operational carbon. Maybe you can explain a little bit about that. And you know, how would you see kind of like some of the stuff that Max is doing may actually be able to, you know, help with some of this impact? Because I guess the steel and the cement side and all of that, I mean, you know, how do you decarbonize all of that? It is going to be a gargantuan effort without any offsets.
Good question. So just to put the question of operational and embodied carbon, just to lay those out. And when you build a building or you build, well, almost anything, you're going to have the amount of carbon that goes into the construction process, into the construction materials, into any refurbishment over the life of that asset, and then into the demolition process. And that's what we call embodied carbon. It's kind of what's in it, right? And we shouldn't underestimate, by the way, the construction process itself. So it's not just the materials. The materials are usually by far the largest element. So particularly things like concrete and steel, which are major sinks for carbon. Huge amounts of energy go into making steel and concrete. But also, you know, when you've got your average site, I was talking to one person from a contractor recently here in Hong Kong who said that they go through about $1 million US of fuel per month at one of their sites. That's a lot of carbon in that fuel, that diesel. Then there's the operational carbon, which is what the building or the asset consumes over the course of its lifespan. And that's from your lights, electricity, heating, air conditioning, lifts, etc. As well, obviously, you know, any gas that's used. Today, we're generally trying to phase out from gas and go into all electric buildings. But any gas that's used, you know, if you've got a 50-story building with 6 flats per floor and each of those has a gas cooker, that's a lot of gas. Heating for water, etc. So that's the operational carbon. So what we really need to be doing, though, is to look at what we call whole life carbon, cradle to grave. So from the first day that you're on site, right through the very end of that asset's life, what are we talking about overall? And you know, you look at different kinds of buildings or infrastructure assets, you'll have a different balance between operational and embodied carbon. So for example, if you've got a 2-story house that's made out of wood, so that's going to have a pretty low embodied carbon footprint. But over the course of the lifespan of that house, you're going to have quite a lot of electricity, gas, et cetera, that's used in order to heat, cool, power it. But if you take a 50-story office building, then you're going to be using probably quite a lot of steel and concrete, glass, et cetera. So the building materials, the building process, it's going to tilt toward the embodied. So you really need to be looking much more heavily at the embodied carbon element, particularly since, you know, in many cities now, in many countries now, developers are trying to make their buildings more green from an operational standpoint because they have occupiers, particularly in the corporates, occupiers who are demanding better performance. They're saying, I need this to be, you know, to perform better. I want insulation. I want double glazing. I want better quality, better controlled HVAC systems, et cetera, right? So the balance tilts a bit. What do we need to be doing? We need to be looking at this and really thinking about what makes the most sense for our cities, for our projects. And it's not just buildings, it's infrastructure as well. You know, you don't see any wood timber buildings in most cities, certainly not in Asia, where there are often issues around fire, traditional issues around fire prevention that have led to building codes that exclude the use of timber. But timber can be a very, very low carbon material, particularly compared to using purely concrete and steel. Now, we can get to maybe 20 odd stories now these days, and it's being done in other countries around the world, but it's not being done in Asia. Should we be thinking afresh about the use of timber in our buildings, particularly as we get to sort of mid high-rise buildings? That could make potentially a large difference. So we need to be thinking a little bit out of the box. That's just one of many, many examples. It's kind of the most obvious thing that you might start looking at. How do we change that? Now, within materials themselves, there's concrete and there's concrete, right? You can have concrete that was, or steel. There's steel and then there's steel. There are low carbon versions of these products, and a lot of people are working very hard to develop new low carbon supplies of these products. But then you've got to be willing to specify them, and B, pay for them, because of course they're not necessarily going to be as inexpensive as the standard stuff. So we need to be looking at the value that we get out of using these products. And that means, having a carbon price ultimately, because there's no better way to get people and companies to change their decisions than hitting them in the wallet, frankly.
Yeah.
And so those are some of the things that I would like to start to see is mechanisms, financial mechanisms. And I think Max is spot on. Look, we need to look at offsetting. We need to look at offsetting as part of a suite of actions, right? It's not that you just sort of do business as usual and then offset at the end of the day to say, all right, I'm done, right? That's not it. It's that offsetting is part of a sort of a table of things that you do. And you've got to look at what you're actually doing fundamentally to see, can we do better? Then the residuals, as you were saying, Pat, in your presentation, the residuals are what we should be offsetting. But we need to be taking action as well. And so it's a combination, it's a balance of these things. And so, we hear from Natalie about all the things that DFI is doing. That's super exciting. And it's these often what look like kind of small things, small interventions that can actually make a big difference. I was fascinated to hear the difference you could make, that 10% difference that Natalie was talking about with doors. Yeah. And we also need to be looking really at the data. And I'm sure Natalie will be able to tell us more about this, but I remember years ago when I was living in England, and this was a very long time ago, so I'm sure things have changed. But colleagues of mine then calculated that the carbon emissions associated with flying an apple in from Africa to the UK were lower than the carbon emissions associated with growing that same apple in England in greenhouse conditions, which kind of was like, that was like, whoa, blow your mind moment. Wait a minute, so I should actually be eating imported apples rather than local apples? But I thought we should be buying local. And there are lots of other social and economic reasons to buy local, but we need to know what the data is. We need to understand that data. That we did another calculation. It was, when you go to the bathroom, should you use paper towel or the hand dryer? And we need to know the answers.
Yeah, thank you, Eli.
A lot more information.
A lot. Yeah, I think that there is a lot of different ways of skinning a cat, as you say. But I think that, yes, I do think that the carbon price is probably something that's needed. I'm just wondering, in this world where we're dealing with so much inflation already, where people are kind of like willing to kind of like increase prices in general because of carbon, and that's a bit of a concern for me. But I think that in the end, it is those bits and pieces that we are doing that is going to make a great deal of difference. And I just want to go back to Natalie, because I know that at IKEA you're doing some kind of like circular packaging or something about circular economy that is also going to reduce the carbon footprint of the products.
Yeah, so actually at IKEA Hong Kong, we are partnering with Carousel, a secondhand marketplace that allows us to help with putting like secondhand items on the marketplace for sale, so that people can get to buy them easier, and then we will reward them with green credits that can be used to purchase like other furniture. So we think it's important to promote circularity, and in IKEA Taiwan, we're actually promoting a leasing term for furniture in office, because we realize that a lot of offices are on leases, meaning that you need to refurbish the whole place and dump away all the furniture. So the only way forward would be to make it a circular business model for owners that will have more choices on how long they want to use the furniture for, and how we can help with the repairing and afterlife. So this ties with what Eli was talking about, like life cycle emission. And we also realized from our recent test for 4 pilot stores of our welcome, understanding their embodied carbon emissions. We realized that one of the missing gap is that we do not have an active furniture reuse or like store materials reuse scheme in place, and how we're going to for example, use our old baskets that are gray in color because we need to do rebranding, so they'll all be turned into red. And we're now working with some local recyclers, hoping to upcycle these baskets into materials that can be used back in the stores instead of turning into some other gifts that might not be directly benefiting to our store. So we're really looking at that circular loop, closing the gap to the end-to-end cradle-to-cradle mentality.
So I use Carousel. How do I get the IKEA credits by using Carousel? So if I sell an IKEA product on Carousel, how does that work?
Yeah, at the moment, actually, you can bring back your secondhand furniture to IKEA, and then IKEA would market it on our marketplace, on the IKEA official account. And when you make a purchase of those secondhand items, they're actually displayed in store. So you can buy on Carousel and collect in store, and we also have the delivery service. And then we will help deal with other logistics.
Oh, very good. Thank you. So we probably have just a few minutes left, and probably would be good. I mean, you know, with this gargantuan task that we have of decarbonizing the world, what last kind of like final words or suggestions that you may have for the audience? Maybe I'll start with Max.
Yeah, I would say that's, you know, for me, the time crisis is something I wake up every morning. Eli mentioned this earlier. You know, for me, attending COP25 and coming back was like kind of going home and seeing that your kitchen sink is on fire. Like, you can't really go back to watch TV in your living room without having a way to, you know, put out the sink. So I think, you know, Natalie and many other people here in Hong Kong are kind of shining examples, right, of like really proactive and innovative action. And I really just want to encourage more young people and even not young people watching this to take the message to heart that we don't have a lot of time left. There's a lot of creativity that needs to be added to the space. There's also a lot of space for new ideas and new innovation. You know, I find this to be one of the most fascinating and rewarding places to work in the world, and I really hope that that sort of inspires more people to join us in this kind of common mission.
Yeah, great, fantastic. Eli, any last comments or words you would like to share with the audience?
I think we're all on the same page. Reflect, commit, act, and don't wait.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, you know, it is imminent. Natalie.
Yeah, echoing with what everyone's saying, I'd just like to add that sustainability is not a competition. I feel like in the competitive retail environment, we're always thinking about how to win the other competitor. But then in terms of sustainability, it's all about sharing best practices. For example, we're looking at water loop refrigeration system that will allow us to save a lot of refrigeration in the base charge, and how we're going to share this technology once we trailblaze it in Hong Kong and to spread it in other Asian markets. I think partnership and collaboration is especially crucial, and engaging team members in the front line, because they are the one who are helping us execute all these different exercises to make our lives better, make our ESG performance better. So it's important to share the benefits and fruits of successes with all our stakeholders, all of our customers, and the suppliers.
Yeah, well, thank you very much to all the panelists. And I'll just sum up, I think, you know, echoing what Natalie said, you know, it isn't a competition. It's a lot more about collaboration. And I just can't see things like Scope 3 emissions getting done without collaborating with the supply chain, for example. And I think that that is critical, absolutely. And the other thing is really that I heard was also about really kind of like looking at the entire life cycle of something, whereby you're not just you know, looking at a certain bit of the puzzle, but looking at the entire life cycle of an organization, of an asset or whatever, and to be able to kind of like see how are you going to be able to decarbonize as much as you can. And then with Max's point about all of the things happening in the carbon space, I think that this whole carbon market is going to be one of the solutions to our decarbonization journey. And as he showed, the voluntary carbon market is only 1 billion in size, and how can that grow? And it really does take organizations, private sector companies that do have the vision to do it, to participate, because otherwise we really just don't have time. It is only 2050 is only 27 years away. It seems like a long time, but a lot of these things take such a long time to implement and do. It's not going to kind of like happen just like that. So it's important to really kind of bring this message back to your organizations and move as fast as we can and really bring it to the boardroom, bring it to the C-suite, and bring it to your colleagues. So with that, thank you, Eli, Natalie, Max. Thank you to PBEC for arranging this session, and I hope that you got something out of it. So with that, we will say goodbye and thank you. Bye.
UPS has a purpose and a promise to deliver what matters for people and our planet. Volunteering 30 million hours and planting 50 million trees by 2030. Impacting the lives of 1 billion by 2040. And going 100% carbon neutral by 2050. Big goals for a brighter future. It starts by doing what's right and holding ourselves accountable. Getting it done with creative thinkers, problem solvers, and those who think way outside the box. Making sure everyone has a seat, a voice, and belongs. That's our purpose, that's our promise. Change is everywhere, and it starts right here.